My name is Dalal. I'm from Hartford, Connecticut. I'm president of Dalal Associates. We specialize in consulting in the field of outsourcing. But I'm here today to talk about the new way of thinking in the business. I'm going to talk about the future of outsourcing, future that's different than what it is today. It's sort of ironic that I'm coming to a country which invented a game of a bunch of blocks that snap together and thought about what the future brings with a little game like that called Lego. So it's going to be fun to talk about businesses to think about future, think differently, and think about outsourcing of real estate in a new, challenging way. Now, it's kind of funny. You should say, gee, we've been doing this for 30 years, and how come now all of a sudden you're going to tell us why companies outsource? And the reason is that in my experience, I've come across many companies haven't quite understood that yet as to why companies outsource. So I'm going to kind of share with you what I have learned and then have you think about it in the context of what outsourcing you do and how you do that. Definition of outsourcing is very simple. At the end of the day, outsourcing's purpose is to create value. The challenge is, what does the value mean? Value has a different meaning for different people. Value has a different perspective based on where you come from, what your goal is, what your corporate goal is, where your company is going. And so that is what creates the biggest challenge in outsourcing, is kind of creating a balance of view between the service provider and the customer of what does the value mean. And until you get to that understanding of what that value means, you're not going to have that correlation or that relationship between the customer and provider that's going to be on a common ground. That's the key. And in my experience, as I've said, what I've come across is that the largest majority of the failures in outsourcing occur when the two parties don't agree on what does value mean. So what I've seen, well, I've really seen three things of why companies outsource. First, for a strategic reason, and we're going to talk about what those are. I've also seen some tactical, just because I got to do it, and then I've seen outsourcing just because. But in my experience, I've come across quite a few of them that have done it because my competitor is doing it, my neighbor is doing it, my advisor, my consultant came and told me that outsourcing is good for me. And that's why they do outsourcing. Without recognizing that in order to outsource, you got to understand what's the value you're trying to create and why that value is important to you. And that comes to really the slide that I like to use, that the purpose of the outsourcing is based on what the business drivers are. It starts with the business drivers, and there are business drivers that create for companies cause for action. You got to change. You got to change the shape of the business. And it's the driver that help you create what the change agenda is. And you can change a company many different ways. You don't have to outsource. There are many ways you can change the company based on the drivers, based on the competition that's out there. One of the options may be to choose outsourcing as a way to meet the agenda for the change. And so a lot of times now when people say, hey, I don't understand what's the value of outsourcing, my question says, what are your drivers? What do you want to change? If you outsource, will you be able to effectively compete in the marketplace against the environment you're facing? Let's take the good example of Apple. How did Apple knock out, remember Sony Walkman? You know, we used to carry this big box, you know, with the big headphones, and said that was a great innovation. What did Apple do to change that business? It's not the iPod, it's the iTunes. They changed the business model of how the music was delivered. It's the business driver that needs to create the change agenda, that needs to create the cause for action, and one of the cause for action could be outsourcing. So now, when the people ask the question, what's the value you're trying to create? My question is always going to be, will it change the shape of the business you're in? If it doesn't change the shape of the business you're in, you're not going to be competing effectively in the marketplace. You're not addressing the change agenda. So what is going to be different? Well, there are lots of disruptive forces. There are kinds of things that are happening that's changing the landscape. So the first is the process change. We used to talk about batch processes where you make a deposit in the bank and it shows up in your account next day. And we're very okay with it if it showed up next day. That has changed. It's become real time. Now we want instant access. We want everything show up on our email, on our iPads and iPods and iTouches and wherever eyes are. That has changed the business, so the time dimension has changed. So now the value of service is not value of the service that I'm going to measure what's going to come tomorrow. I'm going to measure instantaneously. That is changing. So we have to think of the business differently. We have to think about what is it we're changing in the process that's going to create immediate response in the business environment. I don't want to wait till tomorrow to find out. I don't want to wait till tomorrow to download my music. I want my music now. And I want to have full control over it. Technology is changing it every day. Technology has been one of the biggest drivers where outsourcing has exploded. Because with the networks, you don't have to be in one place. You can be any place. Because of technology, you can have a building like this and not have a permanent office. And I think later on, when you take a tour through that, that's one of the key messages that I really heard today, that one of the models that ISS has chosen is people need to work where they're the most comfortable. That says that, hey, that requires technology, and that's changing. Innovation. Lots of innovations are occurring. That's changing the business. That's changing the way business is being delivered. And then finally, data analytics. I think we have not paid attention to the amount of data we have, amount of data we have collected. It doesn't matter what business we're in. It's not about consumer marketing. It's not about Amazon knowing what you bought yesterday. Data analytics is for everybody. ISS can probably tell you where the most amount of traffic is in a given building and then rearrange the building to make sure that that part of the building is the most productive. And I think what I heard today, that the most productive part of the building is cafeteria. So create a cafeteria that's a central place for people to come, where they can exchange ideas, can have an innovation take place. That is data analytics. So data analytics doesn't have to be a big deal. Data analytics is for everyone that can pay attention to the data they already have, data they're collecting, and then doing something with it. Value comes from understanding the data you have. Value comes from understanding how that data can be translated into something more meaningful that generates value for the future. So, where are we going? I think business transformation is going to be the bigger goal for reason for outsourcing than cost savings. Help me change my business. Help me change the way I do business, because my business drivers I can't address on my own. I need the Future 2020 book. I need you as an expert in facilities management to come and tell me what the future is going to look like, how the productive people work. You're going to tell me, because to me that's important. And that's where, as the previous speaker talked about in the last slide, that as a provider, you have to be a consultant. You have to be an advisor, because you're the expert, you have the data, you have the knowledge. And it's the knowledge and data that's going to help your clients transform the way they do business, and it's the transformation that's going to make your clients successful, address their business drivers, and therefore their partnership becomes a win-win or a no-lose, no-lose. Integrate process solution over activity-based, and I'm going to talk more about that as my future, what I'm going to think about. A strategic relationship. This is not a one-time transaction. Outsourcing is almost like marriage. You are thinking in terms of a long-term relationship. You're thinking about a common goals. You're talking about common value. It is a strategic relationship. It is a vested relationship that is going to create the real value that businesses need. Innovation and sharing of the best practices. Innovation is by many, many people. And the idea of creating value comes from not just you as a customer. Customers don't always know better. Providers know a whole lot better than you, because they've dealt with lots of other people. So as a customer, you're looking for your provider to bring innovation to you. And if they're not bringing innovation to you, if they're not bringing a way to do things differently than what you've thought about, then that's not a good relationship. You want a provider that's going to be innovative, that's going to come to you and say, hey, let me tell you how you should do things differently. Because that's what I've seen it here. That's I've seen elsewhere work better. Here's a model that it's a greater. Further leveraging of global advantages we talked about, risk management is going to become an important part. I think companies are now thinking a lot more in terms of, yeah, I understand that I need to create value, but there's risk associated with it. And several times, customers' decisions are based more on what is less risky than what creates higher value. Management, by and large, are risk averse. And so when we're talking about creating value, there's the opposite side of it, and that's called risk management. So as a provider-customer relationship develops, one of the things that the provider has to come to the customer and identify what risks the company, the customer has if they don't outsource. And there are ways you can mitigate the risk once you outsource because those are known risks. So a relationship of the future is going to be based on how can a provider come to me to reduce my business risk besides creating the value. In fact, I have a kind of definition that I've used when people say, when do people outsource? And I have a simple definition that says company will decide to outsource when they believe it is riskier to keep it in-house than have somebody else do it. So to me, that's what information IFM, next generation is taking all of these things together and saying, yes, these are the traditional services we've been doing it. This is the information infrastructure that allows people to be productive. And then finally, I gotta think about productivity management, improving employees' quality of work life. How can they work from home? How can they work from a different place? How can they come to a work here in a small work group where they can be more productive without being tied to a desk, without being tied to an office? People are most productive when they feel most productive. And to me, the role of IFM is to really help create the environment where people can be productive. And that's why it was great to see that this building has given that a lot of thought. That's what the 2020 vision talks about in terms of what the productive function looks like, what makes people productive. And so to me, IFM of future is not facility services, is not building management, it's not transaction management. It is all of that, but it starts from top down, not bottom up. The value starts from understanding what creates productivity in the people that creates value for business, and everything else got to be done as part of making that productivity the core focus of IFM. So, thank you very much.